What does it truly mean to be happy? And are you brave enough to have those tough conversations one time to put yourself on the path to have a fulfilling life? Today, I sit down with Ozzy, an amazing CEO and an amazing leader. Today, we're going to be talking about making tough decisions, overcoming challenges, the pressure that we put on ourselves to fulfill other people's dreams, and so much more. Today's conversation is packed full of life lessons, making tough decisions so we can put ourselves in a situation for happiness in the future, and foundations that we can build upon. We're going to learn all about how Ozzy built IBH, an amazing organization that's meeting the needs of her community, serving families and uplifting others. We're going to hear about how she built her team from just one person to a team that is now thriving. In today's episode, we dive deep into the heart and hustle of this amazing leader. Let's get after it.
There was no sleep, even during sleep, I was
dreaming about it.
I was dreaming about work and what I'm gonna do the next day. So I started IBH in May of 2013. We didn't have an office at the time, so I interviewed this young lady by the name of Heather Bentley. She had just obtained her bachelor's degree, had no experience in ABA or in the field of mental health or autism, but she came on board. We slowly grew. We're now over 200 staff. Heather Bentley is our executive director of clinical services, so she grew with me.
Yay,
She's
Heather!
Amazing. Over 700 clients. It's just beautiful, to see how we all grew together as an agency.
Ozzy, welcome to the show. This is going to be a great conversation today. Here on the Hart Hustle podcast, we love hearing from leaders like you about the heart and hustle that got them to where they are today. Now, I know early in your career, you had a love for neuroscience, but a conversation with a friend put you on a different path. Let's kind of talk a little bit about that.
Of course. Well, let me go back just a few years before that. I was a pre-medicine student, major. I wanted to become a psychiatrist. I had passion for medicine, treating people and mental health. So I put the two together and I decided to become a psychiatrist. So I was a neuroscience major as an undergrad. I took all the prerequisite courses to get into medical school. I got into medical school, but second semester into medical school, I realized medicine is not the fit for me. So I left medical school. It was a very difficult decision, as you can imagine, because I had worked so hard to get into a good medical school. I went to UC Davis.
Do you mind if we actually talk about that a little bit, Ozzy? Because there are so many people who find themselves going down the path of what they think they're going to be doing for a long time. But then they come across these experiences in life that kind of give them the signal that maybe this isn't what I want to do. What was the experience like? What type of conversations? Who did you lean on to make that big pivot away from, that undergrad?
Very good question. It's not easy, having this belief all throughout your life, your childhood. And I don't know how much you know about the route to getting into medical school. It's very difficult. It's very
prerequisites, a ton of classes, application process, everything. Yeah.
Research, publications, just everything. It's a very competitive process. But I went through it. And I did not like medicine. I mean, I loved helping people, but the fact that I had to work at a hospital setting or maybe a clinic and see patients after patients, and with the with new medicine, you only have maybe 20 minutes to see a patient. So you have to rush through your appointment. We really can't get to know your patients or, make connections. Um, so I realized this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. Um, so, early on, I started seeing counseling. I went to get counseling at UC Davis, and I kept on telling them, I'm not really enjoying myself. I don't think this is it for me. And they were trying to walk me through it, that, you're gonna like it, just give it time. And then second semester, I said, I'm not happy. The Aussie you see on this side, I'm a very happy person. I'm very optimistic. I'm very positive. Every morning that I wake up, um, birds are singing. I look out the window. I'm just happy. And I didn't see myself as being happy at that stage of my life. So, I called my parents one day and I said, um, I'm leaving. I'm leaving medicine. Um, well, I went back. I
What
went
was
back
that
home.
we can't skip past this. What was that conversation like? This is really important for the audience because having this conversation with our parents who expect us to go down a certain path is a really scary obstacle to overcome. So what was that conversation like with mom and dad?
It wasn't easy. I mean, I guess they worked as hard as me to get me where I was. They helped me throughout the way. Um, so it definitely wasn't an easy conversation for them. I think they saw it as a failure, possibly. Um, but
Do you think that that failure perspective, I'm not trying to dive too deep into this, but I think this is a really important conversation because when I talk to my friends who are in the middle of their early professional career or when we're in our 20s, right? We're making big decisions. And so many people are informed because of the pressures that mom and dad put on us. And so when you said maybe they perceived it as a failure, I'm wondering if they saw it as a failure from your perspective, or maybe they looked at it as a failure from mom and dad's perspective, where they're going to have to say, what am I going to tell everybody who's asking about Aussie and how medical school's going? It's a
exactly,
really
yeah.
interesting conversation.
No, you're right. It was a failure for all of us. I'm sure that's how they saw it. Um, Now, if you want me to go back a few years before, I came to the US when I was 17. Um, so I finished high school here. I graduated from high school here. So I only went to high school my senior year. And it was the most challenging year of my life because I came here. I'm Iranian. So I came here from Iran. Um, and now I'm in high school, and I went to Maryland. We lived in Maryland for 1 year, and that's where I went to high school. And it's primarily white.
Hmm.
So and I did not speak a word of English. Um, However, academically in Iran, students are very high. So they placed me in advanced classes, AP Physics, AP Chemistry, pre-calculus. And just imagine I didn't speak any English. So you can see how difficult that era was for me to get through all the classes, graduate from high school. I went to college again, all thinking, I'm going to become a doctor. We came to this country, um, we made it so far, and I got to make the best out of it. And at that point in time, medicine was the most rewarding field. You help people, you make a good living for you and your family. It was just,
The
everything.
status that comes along with that,
Status.
right? Even for mom and
Exactly.
dad.
Exactly. Um, So I went to college. I worked very hard as a pre-med student. Um, and again, English being my second language. And we didn't have, at the time, we didn't have the technology we have today. So I remember I had to take a tape recorder to every lecture, tape record the lecture. I would come home, transcribe it, and then I had a English to Farsi dictionary. I then had to translate the lecture and then learn the lecture. So, it would take me probably 5, 6 times as just any other student to grasp the information, because mainly because of the language barrier.
The amount of the tenacity and the grit and the challenges that you've overcome, Ozzy, I'm so glad that we can have this conversation on the podcast, because this tells me so much more about you and your resolve to be successful, but also your bravery as you went through this process. This is really, really cool. And thank you so much for sharing this story. This is absolutely amazing. You can keep going.
Of course, of course. So again, it was no easy work. Being a pre-med, English as your second language, the hard work I had to do, all the hardcore biology classes and chemistry classes, organic chemistry, AP, the different, the graduate level physics classes, all of that. And then to get into medical school and then say, no, I'm not, I don't want to do this. So when I left medical school, I went to study to pursue my education in neuroscience. So I was a doctoral student, became a doctoral student in neuroscience. And then my goal was to become a professor, teach psychology classes and neuroscience classes. So I graduated in 2006 with my doctorate in neuroscience, and I started teaching at a local community university. It was very rewarding. I loved it. But about the same time, a friend of mine who was working at this nonprofit organization funded by the state that services individuals with autism spectrum disorder and other special needs. They had an opening for a doctorate in psychology, which I am. I'm a doctor of psychology with a specialization in neuroscience. I applied for the position. Come to find out, the opening was for a clinical psychologist, which I'm not. I'm not a clinical psychologist. About a month later, the director of the organization called me and said, would you be interested in becoming an autism specialist for the organization? And I said, well, it definitely sounds amazing, but I'm not an autism specialist. She said, well, don't worry about it. To come in for an interview. So they interviewed me. They said, we're going to send you through all the trainings that makes you an autism specialist. So I accepted the position. This was in 2008. And I've just been in the field since 2008. And it's been the most rewarding experience. I feel like and this is what I tell all the youngsters, just don't settle for less. Find your dream. Look at me. I went from medicine to academia to then find this field, which I'm very passionate for.
The scariest experience is obtaining the life you thought would make you happy, but it not feeling like what you hoped for. How many times have people made that mistake, Ozzy? I think it's really interesting for us to talk about that because you were brave enough when the writing on the wall that only you could see said that you're going down the right path or the wrong path, and you made an extreme pivot to be happy. That is something I admire so much. It's really tough for me to be able to communicate it through this virtual setting, but I look up to you so much because
Thank
so many
you.
people do not have the bravery to do those things, and they wind up in a place of regret, which is a terrible place to end up in.
I agree. I agree. I think part of it was luck, but I wouldn't settle if I started a career or a path where I was not happy. I would change it. I would try something different. I'm not a type of person that would go to work 8 in the morning, come home at 5, 6, and being miserable. I just can't see myself being that. So
Do you ever think about the responsibility that we have to the people who came before us? Grandmas, grandpas, moms, dads, great extended family members. I use this as an example on the podcast often, but I use this as a reflection activity in my personal life. My great grandfather was a sharecropper in Arkansas. For trade of labor, he had a place to stay for his family to live. A huge sacrifice. My grandfather was born in the 1930s as a black man and was discriminated against because of the color of his skin. My father was the first entrepreneur who had opportunities to do something different and break the mold. Now I'm here hosting this podcast a couple generations away from them, and I often think that it is my duty to live the most fulfilled life and take advantage of the most opportunities that I possibly can because the people who came before us didn't even have that opportunity. That's an
I
amazing thing
agree.
to reflect on.
I agree. I totally agree with you. And this is what I tell my children. I have an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. I tell them, um, dream big. Um, you gotta go for what really makes you happy. And I tell them, I tell them, you have it so easy. I mean, with everything they have. And I tell him my story. I say, your mom, look at me. I had to go through all these hardships to get to where I am today. And it's a pity if you don't take advantage of the easy life you have and all you can achieve in this world. And this country is a world of opportunities. I mean, it truly is. um, Anybody can do it. I mean, if I did it, I really think anybody can do it, um, if they just work a little hard. That's my story.
I mean, it's a beautiful story, but your story doesn't stop there. I was listening to a podcast probably 3, 4 months ago with a psychiatrist who was talking about Gen Z and their low levels of resiliency. One thing that they were talking about was because of the standard, more common than not, American family nucleus, we do not have relationships with our extended family members, grandmothers, grandfathers from either side. And one of the things that we miss out on in those experiences and those relationships is the oral stories that are told about how we had to come from Iran and how your mom was 17 years old and came to a high school where she didn't speak the language and had to come home every day and translate the lectures that she was hearing, XYZ. Those oral stories are so important for building resiliency. And that's an amazing advantage that you've given your children as well. And I don't think they probably realize that yet.
I don't know. I think they're proud. But you're right. A lot of Gen Z kids don't get to don't have the family values. the advice from the mom, the grandpa, the aunt. Um, Definitely, they're a different culture, different generation.
It's an interesting time in our society today because we have so many challenges when it comes to mental and behavioral health in our communities. So, with your work that you guys are doing at IBH, I want to talk about the origin story of starting the organization. So, how did we get from where we were to where we are here today? Let's kind of walk down that timeline and share your story.
Of course. So I started working for that nonprofit organization in 2008. It was a wonderful experience. I learned everything there is to know about autism, the field of ABA, the needs, service providers, what's needed, what's lacking from that organization. And then at some point, I felt like my work there was, as an autism specialist at that organization, my work was to oversee other ABA providers. So I would oversee their work. But at some point, then my work wasn't as satisfactory anymore. I wasn't the one making the difference. I was watching everybody else make the difference, and I was just either critiquing them or giving them feedback or reviewing their work. So I decided, and based on all the knowledge that I had gathered from that organization and what the needs really are, to start up my own organization. And that was no easy task.
It's a scary jump making going from the 9 to 5 and then trading that in for a 24/7 365.
Exactly. And it really was like that 24/7 for probably a good 2 to 3 years. There was no sleep, even during sleep, I was
Dreaming about it.
I was dreaming about work and what I'm gonna do the next day. Um, so I started IBH in May of 2013. Obviously myself, and we didn't have an office at the time. So I interviewed this young lady by the name of Heather Bentley over the phone. I interviewed her. She had just obtained her bachelor's degree, had no experience in ABA or in the field of mental health or autism, but she came on board, and we slowly grew. We're now over 200 staff. Heather Bentley is our executive director of clinical services, so she grew with me.
Yay,
She's
Heather.
amazing. Um, we have over 700 clients. It's just beautiful, to see how we all grew together as an agency, and built the agency together.
11 years now. You
Yes.
guys have been in business, which is a huge accomplishment. I just crossed in July this year my 10th anniversary, which feels really good. And that means that we are in rare company because a lot
Yes.
of businesses don't survive this long, right?
Right. Yes.
Let's do an exercise in perspective here. If we could go back to the origin of you just making the jump from the 9 to 5 to the 24/7 365, and you could sit across from that version of Ozzy, what advice would you give to her as she's starting this journey?
That's a very good question. I think about it. I go back because the Aussie in 2013 is not the Aussie in 2024. I'm a very different Aussie in so many different ways. I see the world differently. A lot of the things that mattered back then don't matter anymore. And a lot of the things that I didn't even think about at the time is is a big deal today. So the question is, what would I tell Ozzy of 2013, right? I would tell her, just keep on going. What you're doing is going to pay off. Um, you're going to build a beautiful agency. And I never want to take credit for what we have today, because I didn't build it by myself. There were people like Heather Bentley's and Yuki Jens and Dr. Ben Cornell's and Sarah McSween's and um, Amanda Chesjon, our HR manager, and so many more that I can name. Dominique, our recruiting specialist. I mean, we all built it together. It wasn't just me, and we worked hard. We all worked hard, but we can now, and we're still building it. I mean, it hasn't stopped, but it paid off. The hard work definitely paid off. So I would do it over and over and over again. So that would be.
I've been in the mindset recently where I continuously think about having more fun along the way. One of the biggest things that I'm scared of is one day I'm going to get to the finish line, that where I finally can say, I did it. Everything that I said I was going to do, I accomplished. No matter how much I stressed out along the way and put pressure on myself, the one regret that I have when I get there is looking back and saying, I wish I would have enjoyed the process more. Now that sounds kind of just like up in the sky, right? But think about those early days when we start the business and we're so stressed because we're putting the pressure on ourselves. And now look at us where we are today. Did all the stress matter? Did all that negative self-talk matter? Often it didn't, because we're here, right?
But it's all experiences. So even those bad experiences, I mean, you look back and they were good experiences because they made you who you are today. I remember, I think one thing I would tell Ozzy would be, don't take a lot of things personal. There's a lot of turnover in this field. And early on, people would come on board, and then they were wonderful employees. I thought we had a great working relationship. And then they would leave. Let me tell you, the very first employee of IBH that resigned, I cried. I even cried in front of the employee, which now I think must have been, I mean, it's so embarrassing, but I just couldn't help it because I took it personal. I thought, I did something wrong. Well, why does she not like Ozzy or IBH? What did I do wrong? But now a lot of people that fit the culture, fit our IBHS culture, they'll stay. And many don't. And it's okay. It's okay. Even those that do fit the culture, sometimes they move on to do better things, just like I did. And I love it. I'm happy for them. I tell them, I always want to see my employees do great things in life, whether it's with IBH or it's outside of IBH. So yeah, that would be, I guess, my one advice to Ozzy. Just, relax a little. Don't take things so personal.
It's tough though, because this is a unique class of people, right? When you're the CEO and founder of this organization, this feels like our baby, and it feels like an extension of ourselves. I was having a conversation with a good friend this weekend who is also a founder and CEO of his company, and he was saying, the one thing that I really struggle with is the separation of identity between the work that I do and the person who I am. It all seems to have blurred at some point across the table or across this journey. So how do you keep your identity separate from the CEO of IBH and the work that you do? Have you been able to do that, or do you have advice for people who might be struggling in that space?
Well, what's been easy for me is I never really saw myself as a CEO. I see myself as just another employee. I mean, that's if you come to my office, I have a little cubicle next to everybody else. So I don't have an executive office. Everybody calls me Aussie. Um, so I mean, at work, I'm nobody's CEO really, unless I have to be. You know, there are certain times that you have to just put that CEO hat and tell them who the boss is, but that doesn't happen very often. Um, so really, that wasn't a challenge for me. I've always been the Aussie, as a CEO and before being a CEO at home. So I don't have a very good advice in that. I guess
And that's
for
okay.
me, for me it would be just be yourself.
I want to know a little bit about your maturation process in leadership. So, one of the toughest skill sets that nobody seems to learn is being a leader. And often, being a leader is completely different from being a good clinician or a mental health professional, right? So, how did you kind of grow in your leadership journey? How has that been for you as we've gone past the 11 years that we kind of can reflect on?
I guess for me, I delegate. And from early on, I don't micromanage. Um, and I always tell my staff, I only have one brain, but then there is 200 of you, and there's 200 brains. So together, we're going to think so much bigger than just me. Um, I see talent. When I see talent, I recognize it. Um, I decide. I think about, okay, they have this very special skill, what they could be good at, and then I put them in that specific position. But I kind of I lost the question. What was the question
No,
again?
you're totally good. I was talking about your leadership journey and how
Oh,
we've
my
kind of
leadership.
changed along this path, right? So here's a good way for us to kind of pick this up. A lot of leaders that I know often struggle with what I call it's my baby syndrome, meaning this is my organization. I want to control everything from the delivery of clinical services.
Right.
So when we become great leaders, it's easier for us to be able to trust in others and let them
Exactly.
do their job. So it seems
Exactly.
like that's something that came to you naturally from what we're kind of
Yeah,
talking
no,
about here.
it was never, I mean, maybe early on, very early on, it was my baby. But very soon I realized that, if it stays just my baby, that it's not what I can't get it too far. I need people around me to help me grow this baby. The baby was fast growing, and one mom was not enough. I needed a village to grow this baby. Um, and that's what I did. So, we have, again, delegation. I have people, running different departments, and they run it beautifully, probably even better than I would, if I were to do it myself. They just report back to me, or if there are challenges, or if they have questions, they come to Aussie, um, maybe for advice or recommendation. But um, we have different programs run by different clinical directors, different supervisors, different leads, um, and they do an amazing job. So no, it was never my baby, or not for very long. It was my baby. Then it became our baby.
I want to talk a little bit about the topic of like innovation as an example. So we've seen the space change, from ABA services, mental and behavioral health have dramatically changed in the recent years. What got us here is not going to get us to where we're going. With the demand in our communities for so many people needing our services, how are you thinking about technology and innovation, being able to reach people, being able to create efficiencies? What is kind of your perspective as a CEO of IBH right now looking at in the marketplace?
Well, it's a godsend, technology in this field. So we have the electronic medical records that we use for billing purposes, payroll. We have our data collection is all electronic. Um, Something I use frequently is Chat GPT. English is my second language. I can, as much as I try so hard to write a very professional, letter, it doesn't come easy to me. So I just put my thoughts together in Chat GPT, and it writes me this beautiful, long, professional email, to whoever it is. Just you and I doing a podcast here. A lot of our trainings are virtual. Our services, not so much anymore. During COVID, we had a lot of virtual services. But after COVID, we took it back to mainly in-home or community-based. But still, we have some of our therapies are still virtual. Not everybody, not every client can benefit from a virtual service. So it's been wonderful.
What do we say to the CEOs who aren't looking to explore technology, even like ChatGPT, artificial intelligence? What would be a word of advice that you have for these people who are saying, you know what? You're missing out.
You're missing out. It can make your life, your agency, your employees so much easier, so much faster, more efficient. We were initially doing our data collection paper and pencil, and then we had to put all the information into Excel, and then graph the data, because in ABA we're all about data and data analysis. But now with this with this software, electronic data collection, we just push a button and it does the graph for us, so we can see that, like, the trend of the behavior or the progress of the child, everything right there. The supervisor can be in the home, sitting in their home, and they can see the data, see what's going on during session. So everyone should take advantage of the technology.
I agree. I think we have to look at these things through the lens of curiosity, right? The curious mind allows for us to say, how can this fit, rather than this will or this will not fit in our world. And especially, like we talked about, the ability to meet the community with needs that they have. We have to use technology because we only have so much time as a team member. We only have so much focus, so much energy. And so being able to serve the community with this technology is truly amazing. Ozzy, there's a tradition that we have here on the podcast. We end by saying, or giving the previous guest an opportunity to ask you a question. Now, this individual is an amazing CEO who works in the mental health space, but he uses the ability to train service dogs for veterans so they can have a battle buddy and a companion in life. The question that he wanted to ask you was, what is the one way that you can be more vulnerable at work with your team?
What is one way that I could be more vulnerable at work with my team? Tell me a little more about the CEO.
Yes. So this guy's name is Chris Nelson.
Okay.
Right. And he wants to be able to create a better culture of vulnerability in leadership, because he believes that when we are vulnerable with our teams, it lets them know that we are human. And when we are human, we get better results out of everybody. And so he said we need to redefine what, from his perspective, being an alpha in an organization looks like. And because he trains dogs, he's like, being an alpha is not being the tough, scary one, but it's being strong enough to be vulnerable sometimes with your team so you can elicit ideas, start conversations, and help them feel like this is a place where they can contribute. So his question was, what is one way that you can be more vulnerable at work with your team to get those type of results?
Well, for me, again, it's always come natural. I'm myself, and I think just being myself, um, and not pretending to be somebody else or somebody tough or somebody's boss, because I hate that. Even though, I mean, as much as we have respect at work, but I don't want people looking up to me as their boss and being scared. Um, so I guess my vulnerability to them would be just being myself. There's been times, if Ozzy is not having a good day, people at work realize, they know, they ask me, what's going on? Are you okay? And I tell them, this or that happened. So I guess just be yourself. And then when you're yourself, then people can connect to you better. They can communicate with you better. They can relate to you. They can bring to you their problems and be a good listener. That would be my advice.
There's a really interesting concept that we talked about at the end of our episode that I did with Chris. We were saying, it's very interesting how we're seeing the paradigms of leadership change. And when I asked his question from the previous guest, I said, how can we help these guys be better leaders? And he said, what we need to really recognize is the paradigm is shifting in leadership. We have more women who are being amazing leaders that men need to look up to because they are naturally vulnerable. They are naturally showing up as themselves, and they don't fit themselves or try and force themselves into the paradigm of being the tough guy. And that's a big development that we're going to see. And just hearing your response of saying, this is who I am as a leader, is something that reinforces my time with Chris that we spent together. And it just makes it more and more apparent that amazing leaders are, great female leaders like you, which I'm really excited about for the future. Yeah. So as we kind of end here today, I just want to say thank you so much, Ozzy, for coming on the show, sharing your story, talking about how brave you were in those early days to make a pivot towards something that you knew was going to make you happy, changing from the 9 to 5 and committing to the 24/7, 365, and how much you've grown in this journey has been an amazing story for us to be able to share here today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I really enjoyed it. And let me tell you, since we scheduled to have this podcast, I went and listened to some of your other podcasts. And I'll tell you, I've listened to some, but I'll be listening to all and I wish I had found you earlier because people like me, sometimes we feel like we're alone. A lot of CEOs don't necessarily talk to each other. We talk to staff and our clients, but not necessarily to other CEOs, to see what challenges they're facing, what they're doing, what's helping them. But these podcasts, I'm loving them. I've probably listened to 5 or 6, and I'd be sure to listen to all of them. And I'll be following you, for the future podcasts, because these are amazing. Thank you, for what you're doing. You're making a big difference for people like us.
You make my job easy, because all I have to do is create the space for an amazing leader like you to share their story. Yeah. And that's where I feel like this is so powerful. So for everybody who's been tuning in, watching and listening, if you want to discover other episodes, go ahead and check them out, because, Ozzy is a perfect example of what somebody is when there's the beautiful intersection of heart and hustle. So that's a wrap. We'll catch you guys in the next one.